So I think we can start now. Paritosh, what do you say?
Yes, I think we can start now. The attendees
All
seems
right, perfect.
to be good.
So can you just confirm, is there too much noise on my side?
No, it's absolutely clear.
Okay, perfect. So hello and welcome everyone to today's final session on the cloud series that we've been seeing since over a month now. Today we are going to summarize everything that we have learned till now, as well as take a look at a new feature, a new concept in cloud that helps you make applications fast. So what we are going to discuss today will be a little conceptual brush up on what you have been reading till now, studying till now in the first two sessions, and then we'll move on to explore what a certain cloud provider gives in the form of its services. So without any further ado, let me introduce myself. I'm Kumar Hirsch. I hope you know me already from the different chat rooms on Hackslash as well as DSC. So I do hold many titles, but for this session, what's relevant is that I'm an AWS Educate Student Cloud Ambassador, which means that I'm in touch with the AWS global team for educating students about how cloud can be beneficial to their career. I've been holding sessions, taking sessions for quite some time. I got this opportunity in last March, so it's been a year lately. So that has been a good experience for me. Apart from that, I also facilitated the 30 days of Google Cloud program in our college, and that like completed the entire circle for me. I also did AWS on one side and Google Cloud on one side. So I have fair share of knowledge in both of these platforms, and I guess I can provide you with the knowledge that you will require as beginners to get started in the world of cloud. Again, just going through our agenda for today, we have a refresher in the beginning on the cloud concepts, what cloud computing is, what does the word cloud mean, what is it in reality, and then what are the different ways in which it is implemented, how is one way different from another. We have been seeing this in quite detail in the first two sessions, but today we'll just make sure that we revise it well enough so that we can understand the other things that we'll see later. The next thing would be an introduction to Firebase. It's a miniature version of Google Cloud. I hope you have heard about Google Cloud already in previous sessions. If not, you'll hear about it today. You'll get to know what Google Cloud is and why we are emphasizing on it particularly. We also ask you to learn AWS as well. And Google Cloud also, since DSC is an initiative from Google, and they desire that Google Cloud is emphasized more for students. The last program that I talked about, the 30 days of Google Cloud, that also emphasized upon Google Cloud, and that was a great opportunity. It was not possible for you guys to be a part of that event, but if you would have participated, it was a huge learning opportunity. We had two different tracks and a lot of fun labs and things were going on. Many people gained many rewards. So what I mean to convey from this is that AWS and Google Cloud, both of them are quite a solid and equal opportunity for a student. So make sure that you explore both the sites, not just AWS because they have a Educate student program. GCP is also quite beneficial. And the next thing will be some projects. Well, to be precise, we'll have one detailed project in Firebase that will be about handling images on the cloud. Apart from that, we'll see how you can connect your local app to the cloud, how you can set up a remote API in just a matter of few minutes using Firebase and other fun things. But the main project, a full-fledged project that we'll see, that will be about handling images on the cloud itself. So beginning with the refresher, what we have is the first is the question that will arise in your mind: what is cloud? Traditionally, we think of clouds as white substances floating around in the sky, but what is it in the computing context? What does it mean for a computer to be running on a cloud? So a cloud essentially means just somebody else's computer. That's it. A cloud is a machine. We know that for sure. It is running. That's also true, but it's just not in your vicinity. It's not close to you. You cannot access it physically. It's a computer that's running 24/7 and that's connected to a network. So it allows you to do things that you would not be able to do with your system because essentially you cannot run your laptop or your computer for 24 hours every day for a week. You need machines that are especially meant for this job so that you don't have to waste your energy, your electricity, I mean, your resources on running your computer just for a simple task. So a cloud, what you can think of a cloud, how you can see a cloud is that you have to think of a computer that's running somewhere in a data warehouse or a data center kind of infrastructure, and that's running continuously just to provide support to your applications. That's it. So now this is a very vague concept because you can have computers of any sizes, of any scales. They can be running in groups together. They can be running individually. They can be maybe inside a company's infrastructure, inside a company's campus, or they can be aggregated together by a common company. So that leads us to the different models of cloud. Now, there are two ways in which we categorize cloud models. The first way is deployment. This means how, like these groups which you are seeing on the screen, public, private, community, and hybrid, these are categorized on the basis of how the certain cloud structure is deployed to the users. So you can have an instance of a case where your cloud is stored in a public server. So let's think of AWS. AWS is a common, let's say, provider that allows you to host your virtual machines in their actual real machines. So you can think of that as a public cloud because you can allow public access to that machine, to that virtual machine that you have created, and everybody can access it throughout, like across the globe. So that's an instance of a public model of deployment. But again, AWS, GCP, these things are very ambiguous. I will prefer that you do not use these as examples to all these models of deployment. I'm just telling you about all of them just for reference. If you look for a true example of public cloud, that would be something else, and that's not really relevant to our conversation. What we require to understand right now is how what exactly this public word means over here. So it's just that it's a model of a cloud which can be accessed by anywhere, like any user anywhere. So essentially, this means you have, suppose you have deployed an application that's meant for users across the world. Let's say you're talking about Facebook, you're talking about Gmail. So those are hosted on cloud, but they are accessible by public throughout the world. So that is what you can call an example of a public deployment of cloud. Then there's private deployment. Now that means that it's either deployed for a certain, let's say, group of users that are scattered across the globe, or for a certain group of users that are together at one physical location. So this means that the access to this kind of cloud is restricted by location, by user group, or by any other factor that determines whether you can access that particular cloud resources or not. So this is usually used by organizations. Let's say you join a company in the future, then you can think of, like, by common sense, you can figure out that that company will have some internal software. They will have some kind of HR management system in which your profile will be stored. They will have some kind of payroll management system in which your salary details will be stored. So those things a company can choose to have in a local infrastructure, have a local machine for that, or the companies which are situated like scattered across the globe, who have offices across the world, they can choose to build their own custom cloud for this, so that they have one office that's controlling the access to all of this data, but still this data is accessible to all the other offices in the world. So that is an example of a private cloud. Again, AWS also can help you set up a private cloud structure, and so can Google Cloud. So that's why we will like to keep AWS, Google Cloud, Firebase, these things out of the conversation for now. The third category is a community cloud. This refers to a system in which multiple companies, multiple organizations can access the same, like the exact same resources that are hosted on the cloud, and they can like communicate over the cloud and all those things. So it essentially means that you are increasing the scope of the private cloud model to accommodate more people. And since you're increasing the number, since you're increasing sharing, so we term it as community. The last one is a very, I'd say, rare kind of setup in which public and private models are mixed. So it says, like, you can again take this example from a company's point of view. Let's say you join a very huge company that has offices across the world. And there, what can happen is that company can have some resources that it shares with its internal employees, with its internal associates, all the contractors and all that stuff. And there can also be some interfaces, some resources that would be available to the public. Think of the recruitment platform. Some companies choose to carry out recruitment via LinkedIn or InstaHire or some other platforms like that. But some companies, they have their own talent management systems. Now, these talent management systems, they are designed to work internally for their employees as well, because essentially their employees are also their talent, and they have to manage which employee has been onboarded when, what's the role of a certain employee and all that stuff, which is relevant to the currently working employees. But at the same time, it also has to allow other users to register whenever an application opens. You would have heard about many companies carrying out off-campus hiring through their own websites. So that website, that setup, you can think of that as a hybrid setup, because that setup is also used by them internally to track their own employees, and that is also used by them to allow you to be able to apply to those job positions. So that is like, these are the ways in which you can categorize cloud on the basis of how they are accessed, how they are deployed to the users. There's another category for classifying cloud, and that's how, like, how does it offer, what kind of service does it offer. The service, it means essentially the function that your cloud does. So there are multiple cloud providers that provide you an entire machine in their physical location. So let's say you want an entire computer that's running 24/7. You want access over its RAM, you want access over its hard disk and everything. You just want it to behave like a real computer that would normally in your local system. So for that, what you would do is you would look for an infrastructure as a service kind of cloud provider. So that they will provide you with hard, crude resources. They will provide you with actual physical machines. They will provide you with actual data banks, or you can say kind of like any kind of an array of hard drives, or an entire setup in which there are only disks to store your data. Now, there's another kind of cloud model that's platform as a service. So let's say you don't want to go through all this ordeal of managing your own hard disks manually, managing your own processors manually. So what you can do is you can opt for a platform as a service kind of cloud model. So in that case, you will be only provided with an environment to deploy and run your application, and you will not be provided access to how much RAM your machine currently has. You will have no idea how many other applications are running on that machine. You will only be provided with whatever you require. Let's say your application requires 100 MB of RAM at any time. So that provider will make sure that your machine, whichever machine is running your application, that has 100 MB of RAM available for you all the time. Apart from that, you don't have to worry about anything else. How like what's the kind of storage that you have to use, what's the size of storage that you need. They will automatically scale it. They will only require you to input this data in the beginning once. So this takes off the load of managing the machine, and this makes you like it makes it easy to focus on building your application. And then again, coming down another level is software as a service. So in this case, what happens is you get a software that's hosted on the cloud directly. This is not exactly a model where you can deploy your applications. This is a way in which some softwares are deployed for end users. You must have come across Google Slides, which we're using right now. You must have used Google Docs. So all these are examples of software as a service. Compare Google Docs with Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word is a software that you can install in your system locally and use it. It's not like you cannot collaborate inside of it. You cannot have multiple users reading at the same time, because that's a local software that's running in your machine. But if you talk about Google Docs, then Google Docs is not running on your machine. It's an interface that you access via your browser. The actual software that's hosted on some Google Cloud instance running in Google's headquarters or anywhere that Google is controlling. So this means that the software is running inside the cloud, but you as a user have a way to access and use the software only. You're not concerned about what storage is the machine using. Google only tells you that you have 15 GB of storage to store your data, be it emails, be it photos, be it videos, anything. But the actual machine on which this 15 GB has been allotted, is it going to be filled soon, or is it going to die, because hardware dies very often. So you're not worried about all of that. So that is another layer of abstraction that software as a service adds for end users, so that you don't have to worry about literally anything. You can simply go to docs.google.com, edit your document, print, do whatever you want, and then close it. You don't have to worry about whether that application, that Google Docs application, is running or not, whether it's down, whether like anything, literally anything. You just have to worry about how you can complete a document as soon as possible. So that's a model of deployment. That's a software as a service kind of setup. There's another cloud model which I have not mentioned here, but that is something that we'll see also today, and that's called function as a service. So we are essentially narrowing down our scope of use. We began with an entire machine, then we came to just a software runtime, then we came to just the software, that you can only use the software in the form of a service. Now the function as a service thing is you just have access to running a function. That's all. So what you can do in these platforms is that you can write a function that you would want to execute on the cloud, and that function can take in request. You can call them parameters, arguments, whatever you want to, and that will give out some response. So it's essentially like an API. That's the general form of it. There are other forms in which there can be different kinds of input. Let's say you want this function to run whenever you upload a file to your storage. So that file upload event, that will be your input to this function. And this function will finally do something and then return something at the end. That return thing can be maybe modifying the file that was uploaded. So just think of it. Maybe you want to censor any data that's uploaded in your application. So there's like people uploading images, and you want to make sure that nothing vulgar, nothing obscene gets uploaded. So what you can do, you can have a function like this sitting on your database that just looks for every file that is uploaded. As soon as a file is uploaded, it quickly downloads it into the function runtime, checks it for obscenity and vulgarity, whatever you want to. And finally, if there's nothing to be changed, it does nothing. If there's something to be blackened out or circled or anything, you can make the changes in the function and then upload it back to your storage. So it works as another layer of security. It works as a helper kind of thing, which makes sure that you don't have to rent an entire server just to do some small things like these. Later, the image manipulation thing that I mentioned that we'll see, this also works on the function as a service kind of model only. What we will see later, Firebase functions, that's called. So that is a function as a service platform, and that allows you to write your own functions. And in that function, you can download images, you can download maybe any text that's uploaded in your database or anything of that sort, make changes over it, and then upload it back to your database storage or wherever you want to. So that's a very compact form of computing that allows you to focus only on the 5 or 6 lines of code that you write inside your function, and you don't have to worry about the entire machine, the runtime, whether it's crashing, whether you need to scale it up for multiple users or anything of that sort. Only thing you need to do is optimize your functions code. That's all. So these are the various models that we have in the cloud. Now the next thing is understanding Firebase. You have already been through AWS interface, I'm hoping, in the first 2 sessions, or even if not, then you have an idea of what AWS is. It offers a list of services. It offers you to like launch an EC2 instance, which is essentially just a virtual machine that can do anything that you want. It's like your local computer. You can only access it via terminal, and you can install any software, you can run any server, anything over there. Then you must, if not, then we'll today go through the Google Cloud interface also. And that is also a quite detailed interface. It has multiple services that it offers. You can host Kubernetes clusters. You can have machine learning models. You can do so many things with them. And the interface that AWS and GCP have, they are rather complex. For a beginner, that can be quite intimidating because it is difficult to grasp so many concepts as well as apply them in practical life at the same time. That's why we have chosen Firebase for this session. Firebase is a miniature version of Google Cloud, and it offers only the very essential services that you will require for an application's development. It does not go into length in, allowing you to run your own load balancers or host your own VPNs or anything of that sort, whichever is complex, whichever will be required for a larger organization. But rather, it focuses on beginners, on early stage developers. And let's say you're building an application, you need a database for your application. And right now, you want to focus on your mobile or your web app, and you don't want to waste much time into building your database or your server for the database. So Firebase can come in that place and fill the gap, and it can allow you to have a ready-to-use database by just connecting it directly, and then like getting over all of that hard part that you'd have to go through if you were setting up your own database. Then there's other services. So let's go ahead and then let's see what exactly Firebase is and how it can help you. As I mentioned, Firebase is a remote backend platform similar to Google Cloud. So it is meant to replace your traditional backend, which you would otherwise develop. So it's like you have a database up here, you have file storage up here, you have a machine learning model, you have a place to host your machine learning models, you have, let's say, authentication servers pre-built. So these are the most common things that you would require in a backend. And Firebase already has all of them built and hosted in the cloud. And the second point is it imitates cloud by offering cloud-hosted backend services, as I mentioned, authentication, authentication, and then you have storage, and then notifications and ML. All of these things are made easy. It helps you shift your focus from backend to your end user application because now, since you have the database already pre-built, you just have to connect it to your application, and you don't have to waste your time into designing an SQL server, like hosting an SQL server first, and then hosting another server that will help you communicate with that SQL server, because generally we do not communicate with the database directly. So all those complications were just removed. Then the next thing is that it is versatile. We talked about it being a remote backend platform, just being suitable enough to get the hassle of building a backend out of your scene, but it also can be built upon and also can be extended to build a very large variety of applications. It's not always meant for a mobile application or a web application. You can even have standalone Firebase projects that support hosting REST APIs, or that can do things on their own. You don't always need a client for this. So it can be made into a full-fledged web solution, cloud solution, if you are really looking to do it. But at that point, when you really grow into that area where you want to do big things with cloud, at that point Firebase gets a little costly. So the best thing to do with Firebase is just to stick to the basics. Whenever you're building an Android application, whenever you're building a web application, if you're trying to host a very basic ML model, let's say you're built on TensorFlow Lite, so you can easily host those things up there, and you can get an API endpoint, or you can have an in-app connection, and you can access your data internally. Again, this is the same thing that we talked about earlier. We have a long list of things that we can do with Firebase. Some of the common ones include database. You can have your app's user data easily connected to a web server, cloud server that can actually help you to do a lot of things with it. It's not just about storing data. There's another part of Firebase called functions, which I talked about in the beginning. So you can couple functions and database together to do amazing things. Let's say you have a chat application and you want to like make sure that people are not typing wrong things or communicating wrong things with each other. So you can simply have that function sitting on top of your database, and that will monitor all the communication that goes through your database. It will make sure that everything is filtered and censored and then store it again. So that way, your whatever routine cleanup tasks or the maintenance tasks that you want to do, they can be done as well. So it's not just a conventional SQL or NoSQL database in which you store data, you read data. It's much more than that. Storage, again, it's you can store files there. It can be of any type. There's a limit to storing files as well, but the addition of Firebase functions with it, that makes things very easy. Authentication, that's a common issue that developers come across while building mobile applications. Essentially mobile applications, because web is still simpler for integrating an authentication module. For mobile, it gets tough because not every platform offers its own mobile SDK for authentication. So Firebase, what it does is it compiles a long list of various providers like Facebook, Google, and then you have simple email password, then you have phone authentication with OTP. All those things are offered by Facebook. All you have to do is just use the Firebase authentication SDK inside your application, then choose what kind of authentication you want for your app, and you can get started with it. You can even have, like, even on free projects, you can choose to authenticate users via OTP up to 10,000 users per month. So that's a very generous amount that Firebase offers for early age applications. Because if you take a look at some of the premium OTP providers, OTP authentication providers, then you'll realize that that is a costly process. Sending text messages is not as cheap as we think. And Firebase, being backed by Google, it offers it offers that to us at a very I mean, at literally nothing. You don't have to pay anything for the first 10,000 users per month. So that's a very generous thing that you can avail for free from Firebase. The last thing is ML. You can have ML models hosted on Firebase. You can create REST API endpoints for that, or you can use them directly inside your applications. Let's say you're building an app where you want users to be able to like like users are trying to get recommendations based on their user history. So in that case, you can have Firebase ML Kit. That's the service. That's the name what they call it. You can have the ML Kit host a TensorFlow Lite model, and that model can take in user data and then provide you with a list of recommendations or whatever you can do with TensorFlow Lite. So it essentially is a place to host your TensorFlow Lite model and do literally anything that you want inside your applications or outside on REST APIs or any other kind of interface that Firebase supports. So now that we are done with the theory part, let's go and explore the interface of Firebase first, and then we'll take a look at some of the common projects. So for that, let's go to firebase.google.com. So this is the landing page that you'll come across when you're trying to log into Firebase for the first time. You have to click on Go to Console. And this will list your projects that you have done till now in Firebase. Now I've done a lot of projects. That's why we have a long list here. But essentially, you'll have it empty entirely. What you can do right now is click on Add a project and simply enter a name. I'll call it Test App. This will be a unique ID for your project automatically generated. You don't need to worry about it. Click on continue. This is optional. You can allow Google Analytics. In this case, what you'll get from this is that Firebase also tracks by default the use of your applications whenever deployed to users. So let's say you are constantly rolling out updates, releases, and maybe there are bugs in some of your applications, some of your versions. So with the Crashlytics, crash reporting, and all those stuff, you can have a good idea over which version is causing crashes, which particular line of code has a fault in it. You can even get details up to that. And I know this is offered by almost every other provider out there, but this is a very important feature for beginner developers as well. And Firebase being a platform for beginner developers, it is a great thing that they have included this over here. Apart from that, you also get A/B testing and then event-based cloud function triggers. This is also something that we'll take a look at next. But this is totally optional for you right now. You can even get it later. For now, I'll just choose not to take it, and I will just let it create the project. So that's it. Our project is ready. So what I mean to say to you over this is that all it took was just 2 clicks for us to get a project set up over here. If you go through AWS, if you go through GCP, there's a very complex interface. You have to first plan out how many machines you'll need. You have to first plan out what resources you are going to need inside your app, and then provision them individually. But what we did here was we just clicked on create a new project. We just gave a project a name, and we have a Firebase project ready, which has all of these services. As you can see, we have an authentication module, we have Firestore and database. These are two different types of databases offered by Firebase. And then we have storage for storing files. Then there's hosting for even you can even host your web applications over this. You must have come across URLs that are like something.web.app. So these are Firebase URLs. This means that particular website is hosted on Firebase. This hosting is entirely free. You only get that domain.web.app kind of thing. But if you have your own domain, you can even connect it with that, and you can have production-looking application hosted on Firebase. Next thing is functions, as I talked about. Functions is the thing that adds all the juice to your application. It can automate a lot of things. It can add very powerful features to almost all of the services mentioned on this list. And without functions, I feel the storage, database, those things will become very monotonous. They will have nothing much to do otherwise, other than just storing and accessing data. The last one in this list over here is machine learning. You can have your MLKit models deployed over here, written in TensorFlow Lite, and then you can access them inside your applications or via the REST APIs. Apart from that, as I mentioned, we have Crashlytics, we have performance data, then we have app distribution, how many, which users are using which version of your app. We have a test lab where you can roll out your applications over hundreds of devices that are running inside Google Labs, and they will like return to you video of how that application worked inside your app inside their lab. Now there are automated systems which go through your application, clicking on every button that's there, clicking on every text field that you have created in your app, and that way you can gain an idea of where your application actually breaks, what kind of flow have you not covered about. So these are very advanced features. These are something that you have to go through a lot to get them set up manually, but Firebase offers them in a very simple way. So we can keep going on. There are a lot of things over here. There's cloud messaging, in-app messaging. Like these things are for sending notifications. In-app messaging is about sending notifications via your applications to each other. Like let's say you want your app to send a notification to the user when they do a certain activity, and you don't want them to be connected to the internet while they do so. So you can use in-app messaging. Then there's other aspects of an app also that they can send messages to your server directly whenever they do something. Like an event is triggered and you want that to be logged, so you can use that. Then there's cloud messaging in which you want to, let's say, send a broadcast notification to all the users. in your of your application. You can use cloud messaging for that. Even if you want to target only a certain set of users, let's say you want to target the freshest user which have logged in your application in the past 1 day only. So you can use cloud messaging for that. There are multiple filters written over there with which you can target the exact group of people that you're looking for. So if you go into detail into Firebase, then it has literally everything that you will need to build a final end user kind of application that you can deploy and actually making money out of. But since we are just learning, so we'll restrict ourselves to the build list only. And we'll start by exploring the real-time database interface. Real-time database and Firestore, these are two types of databases that Firebase offers. Real-time database is a large JSON tree. So I'm just going to click on create a database. That's all. And just go with the default settings. I'm choosing test mode because I want to be able to access this data via my application. If I go with logged mode over here, then I will not be able to read the data or write into this database via my application. You can control this data, this access, like who gets to write in your database, who gets to read from your database via this rules tab. So you can define the rules by which like read will be allowed. It says only if something has been done after this certain date. So you can define the rules how your database will be read and written to using this interface. It's very simple. You have a playground. You can learn how to write the rules exactly. And most of the times when you're creating a new application, when you're testing it out, you only need them to be read true and write true. That's all. Even this works for me right now because I don't have to do anything before this or after this or anything of that sort. But if you're trying something out, read true, write true will work. And if you're looking to build an application that will be deployed to users, then you will have to go through the process of finding the correct rules, how to which users have to be allowed in which particular table and how to restrict them. Those things you'll have to go through once. Coming back to the data, this is a viewer interface that Firebase offers. So this essentially is your database, this thing. Now you can add branches to it. Let's say I have table one, and this will be a table that will contain key and key one, let's say, that has value one. Just a second. Key one, value one. And I click on add. So what it did for me was this is now essentially a JSON structure. It created a node inside of my root, which was called table one, and that node now has a key value pair. That's key one, value one. Now inside of this, I can have another one. Let's say key two, value two. So these become my data points. This is my identifier for the value, and this is my actual value over here. So suppose you're trying to save a list of users for your application. What you would do is you would create a main node called users, and inside of that you will have an ID. Let's say user one, and inside of that you will have different values for the user. Let's say name is something, and you have another. Let's say DOB you're trying to add, and it's anything 0101200. So this became a user object inside your users table. You can add another object using user2 and then replicate the entire process of adding both of those fields over here. And another one for DOB. Done. So this way you have two users now inside of your users table. This is another table you can call like this is not exactly a table. This is what we are calling as a table, but this is just a node inside of it. This is a parent node you can call it because this is the root node inside of which every data, all the data is stored. And then you have parent nodes and then you have children nodes. And inside of that you can choose to structure the data in whichever way you want. Now I've chosen the way in which user one is the ID and then we have details inside of the ID, but you can choose a different way for yourself. And any kind of way works as long as it is working inside your application. So this way we have created a project on Firebase, we have created a database for it also, and we have stored some data inside of it. The next thing we'll do is we'll go to let's say, yes, the next thing that we need to do is we have to add an application. Now, what an application is and what is a project? What we created till now was a cloud instance. This only was a container for our database, for our storage, for our hosting, and all the services that we require. But we also need a consumer for it. We need something, a client or something of that sort that can actually access this database. So for that, we need to create a web application. Now, we don't need to create a web application for like compulsorily. You can even have Android, you can have iOS, you can even have a Unity application, which means you can build a game and connect it to a Firebase database. But for now, we are going with web, and the connection process for any other kind of app is similar to this. So what you have to do is you have to give the application a name. I'll just call it web app, and you have to register it over here, and they will generate a certain configuration for your web application. Now, this just think of it. Let's say you have a React application that you want to connect to your cloud instance, to your Firebase instance. There has to be some way in which that application can identify your project, in which it can figure out which particular Firebase project do I have to access the database of. Because just like my test app, there are multiple Firebase projects that have been created by other users. How will my project figure out, how will my React application figure out which exact project to connect to? So for that, we have a config object that's issued for each application. And this contains the details about my particular project. If you focus over here, then we have this ID that was created for my project, and that's appended for my database URL. Then that's the project ID over here. Then we have a storage bucket that also is appended with that project ID only. Then we have a particular messaging sender ID, we have an application ID. So these things help to establish the connection between my local application and the global or the remote hosted Firebase project. So what I need to do is just copy this. That's all. And now I'll proceed. Like I can click on continue to the console right now, no problem. Even if you forget to copy it, you can always come back to this settings page. Click on this, come to project settings, which is where we are right now. Go down and you'll have a web app created over here. So you can take a look at the config object. If you're building a plain vanilla JavaScript application, I mean a website essentially, then you can use the script tag to import the Firebase SDK, and then another script tag will have the initialization code. So this is very simple for a basic web application. But if you're doing a React app, because essentially we're talking about building an application, not a website over here. So in that case, the process is a little different. What you need to do is you need to install the Firebase SDK first and then initialize that with this Firebase config object, which we will take a look at next. So instead of going through the entire process of creating a new React project, what I've done is I already have a test application created, and I've already installed the Firebase module inside of it. That is just a two-step process, which I'll explain how you can do. But what's important is to understand that how you will initialize things and how you will access things. The initial setup, how you can create a new React application, or those things don't really matter. So I'll quickly bring the test app folder over here and open it with VS Code. So this is my project. Now the things that I have done till now is I've only run a few commands. I'll type it out here. I've run a create React app command and named it test app. That's the first command that I ran to create this project in the first place. And then I did an npm install Firebase because I want to be able to use the Firebase package from npm. Those are the two things that I did. Now what I need to do is I want to be able to create an instance of this Firebase application inside of my React application so that I can access my database that I've created in my project over there. What I'll do is, first of all, if you have read a little about React, then you need to worry about the lifecycle things, which is why I'm using a use effect call over here. But this is not relevant to cloud in any sense. This is just a way in which we define things inside React. So here we have, now we can write whatever code we want inside of it, just a place to write our code. What we have to do now is we have already imported Firebase and we need to initialize an instance of the app. So it will be firebase.initialize app. And remember, we copied an object, the config object from the console. You just have to paste it over here. So that's it. We have initialized a Firebase application, and now this application holds the connection to all of our services that we just saw in the Firebase platform. So let's say you want to access the database. What you will do is you'll declare a DB object, and that will be app.database initialize the database. Now what we can do is you can like simply access the location inside of your database. Let's say you created /users. Let's go without slash. We created users, I suppose. Let me quickly check inside of our database. Yep, it was users, and then we have an ID and then details. So you can go to db.ref users, and we want to print every user that is currently stored in our database over here. So these are the commands that you can use to access things. If you have worked on MongoDB or other, let's say an SQL client, then you know that there are certain commands that you can use. They are specifically related to the database interface only. Like db.ref.once, these things will not be useful in any other database. These are only relevant to Firebase database setups. So you will have to learn these commands through the database documentation, but they are not very complex to learn. As you can see, ref means any path that you have inside of your database, and once means how many times you want to read that value. So in here you can define a response that you will get once that value is read. So we have our setup ready. Now we just want to log whatever data we are getting from our remote database. Now let's start the app. I made a little React mistake over here, so I fixed it, and now that should be fine. Let me refresh. Yes. So in the logs, you should have an object that contains the data from your database. Now, similar to this, if you just go to Firebase JS database docs, let's say, not the SDK, read and write data on the web. So this contains a very detailed description of how you can read and write data. We just did the reading part, listen for value events. If you check over here, so we did a .ref, and then we instead of on we had once. So that was for read data once over here. So you can even do that with get. There are multiple methods for it, but Firebase has very user-friendly documentation over these things. You can look for writing data, and this is how it is done. Database.ref and then .set. So if you run this once, then whatever things you have put inside this object over here, they will be written to your database. So this is how simple it is to connect a database to your application, be it React, be it Gatsby, Angular, whatever kind of web application you're building. It can even be a mobile application. So this is how simple it is. You don't need to go through the entire process of setting up your own servers, your own EC2 instance to host your SQL instance, and then another server that moderates all of that connections or anything of that sort. So this was part one. Next thing, just a second. Next thing we'll do is take a look at how we can host an API. We talked about just a second. Yep. We talked about Firebase functions and how they can help you to host your own API. So we will take a look at that interface next, and we'll learn how exactly we can create our own function and host it on the Firebase platform. So I need to upgrade my plan to a certain thing, but that's no problem because you have a free tier over here, and you just need to set the default values for it. Throughout, like when you're testing out your application, trying out your application, you will not face any charges because you won't have real users. But if you're trying to deploy it to real users, you need to make sure that you have a certain like budget in mind, how much you want to spend and how when you want to stop and all those things. So for setting up functions, we need to install this, which I've already done because this takes time. And you can create a Firebase project and then deploy the Firebase project. So let's do that. And once you'll deploy, you will see the function over here. What we want to do is open a new terminal. I'll use git bash for simplicity. And do a Firebase init. I'm hoping before that it will ask me to log in. Yes, because I need to connect my account to my tool over here so that it knows which particular account is trying to create a project using this Firebase init command. Okay, non-interactive mode. Let me switch to the conventional terminal. We have PowerShell up, cd, c. And let's do a Firebase login now. Okay, and what you need to do is just sign in, choose which account you want to use. Let me quickly check which account we have this on. It's 39. Fine. I'll choose this account. Allow all the things that it requires, and this login is successful. So now I have logged in. I can do a Firebase init now. Okay, yes, I'm ready to proceed. Then I can choose what services I want in my application. For now, I'm just looking for functions. I'll go with functions. Press enter. I want to use an existing project because we already made a test app project. You can also create a new project on the Firebase cloud directly from here. But to keep things simple, let's use an existing project. It will fetch the list of things that I have, and I need to go to test app. Yeah. Okay, I'll go with the defaults for now. Yes, no. Yes. So these are the things that you'll actually understand when you're yourself going through the process. It's not very complicated. You have a couple of things to answer, and that's mostly about setting up your project. Nothing too important over here, which can make things go wrong later. Everything that we're choosing right now, they can be updated later. Let's just wait for this to be initialized. Now that it's done, we can open the folder. Let me bring it over here. Here's the folder. Inside of that, we have, as you can see, a functions directory is created, and that contains your index.js. And this index.js is essentially the place where you'll write all of your code. If you open this with VS Code, so this is the place where we are going to write everything. Now, all the Firebase functions, they follow a certain like process. I mean, they have a certain format in which you can write them. What you have to do is you have to make sure that you're exporting something from this file. That's just a JavaScript or Node.js particular thing. And you want to name your function. So let's say we want to create an add message function over here. If you take a look at the official docs, I'm just following that and making sure that you understand that. So you can find all of this code, whatever I'm writing, on the web. I'll later share the links to it also. What I'm doing is I'm instructing Firebase to create a function that waits for an HTTP request. What's an HTTP request is simply what you type in your browser while trying to load a web page. So you're essentially sending a request to that particular URL. So whenever you send a request to our functions URL, then all these things will take place. So what we want to do is we want to have a const original, that's our query text, and we want to write this result to our database. So what we want to do is await admin dot, okay, that's wrong, database dot ref And let's create another place for it. Let's say messages. We're not messing up with our users location, and there it will, I guess push is the right command. I'll have to check once. So what it will do is it will write an object that says original, and it will contain the value for original. And once that's done, it will just return a message saying that this is the result. Let's say added. And after added, let's return whatever we already saved in originally. So this will be the response. So this function, what it does is, like, we are not exactly using this, but we'll take a look at that later. But what it does is it takes out the text part from the query of our URL. It writes that to the database using this admin command, and then it returns a result that says that I added this particular message to the database. So we need to deploy this now to be able to see it in reality. What we'll do is in this terminal, we'll simply run Firebase deploy, and for now we are concerned only with functions, so we'll do only functions. Now you can do a simple Firebase deploy also, but that will deploy, like, that will check for other services also, and that will take time, and we are looking to get our work done fast over here. So that's why we're using Firebase deploy only functions. And in some time, like once the deployment is complete, everything goes well, you'll get a URL where you can access this function. So whatever happens in this process is that it checks for the APIs, whether they are enabled or not, whether you have a machine that's waiting to run your function or not. Then it checks your code, like functions directory, it's saying that it's preparing it for uploading. So what it does internally is it checks your functions directory to make sure that nothing syntactically wrong gets uploaded. Then it packages inside one simple package that gets uploaded, and then upload is finally there. Once it is uploaded to the Firebase platform, then it makes sure that whatever functions you have defined, like we defined a function called add message, so that is identified by the platform correctly, and then it creates that function on the platform there. So all of that would have to be done manually if you were on AWS or GCP, but Firebase being Firebase, it simplifies the process. So now we have the deploy process complete. You can use, okay, yeah, let me open the console once where you can see that this function will have been created. Let's check out this one. Let me refresh the page. So you have a function over here. Now this is just a simple function that takes an HTTP request and it returns an HTTP response. So this is the part that I was talking about when I said that you can build APIs using Firebase. So you can have literally anything being sent over to this particular function in the form of request parameters, and then it can do things inside of it. As we see, what it does is it first extracts the test, then writes to a database, and then returns something to the original request. So this part you can do whatever you want over here, and you don't need an application connected to it. Like we'll see when we'll try it out in the browser directly. So what you can do is copy this URL, paste it over here, and if you were to notice, we have used a request query parameter. So this means that we don't need to provide inside, like, we're not going to send anything in the body of the request. We only need to send a query parameter for the request, which can be added like with the help of a question mark, and you can provide the parameter name and whatever text you want to save over here. So text will be, let's say, hello world. Press enter and let's see what happens. Could not handle the request. Let's see. Let's check out the logs. So this is another feature that they offer where you can check the logs of every little execution that your function had to go through, and what was exactly the error that also is provided over here. It says that admin is not defined. So what we need to do is we need to import the admin thing first. We need to initialize it, and then only we'll be able to use that inside our application, which we missed internally in the first time. So I'll just copy the code. What we have to do is you have to require Firebase admin and then initialize the application. Save this, and I guess we have it already. Yeah, I'll check that later. Anyway, let's try another deploy. So this is how you would deploy any changes that you make to your functions project. Only functions, yeah, that's correct. It will again go through that same process of checking the APIs first and then checking whether your directory, the code that you have written is correct or not. Then it will proceed for upload where it will be deployed again. So let me check if I can show you the updated version from the platform. Yeah, you'll have to go into detailed usage stats, and that's a really complex interface which I do not want to introduce at this point of time. So for now, you'll just know it whether it's updated or not by this terminal. If you can note the difference, first we had creating Node.js function over here, and now we have updating. So this means that this particular command Firebase deploy, it also checks whether you have already created a function with that same name or not. Like if I go into my source code right now and I change this to add message 2, and in that case, if I run Firebase deploy, then it will not update my previous function. Rather, it will create a new function for that particular name. So you don't even have to worry about telling it what function needs to be created or updated. You just have to be clear in your approach that if you're creating something new, you name it uniquely. If you're trying to update something, you make sure that that name is same. You're not doing any changes over that, because that's the identifier to your function essentially, and that it really controls the identity of your function. If that's changed, then your like Firebase will treat your function as entirely new, entirely changed. I guess it's taking longer than usual. Let me try out the API that we were testing earlier. And we have the correct version running. So if you check the database now, go into real-time database. And you have a messages node. Inside of that, you have a unique ID that's created by Firebase itself, and then we are writing in the way that we want it to, original, and then the text. So this like sums up the part in which we use Firebase to create REST APIs. Now you can simply play around with these requests and these response objects. You can like what we did was we took the data via query, which meant that we were providing the data from the URL itself. But you can choose to take in the data from the body itself. You can have a request.body.text or anything of that sort, like whatever parameter you're naming, and that way you can like communicate with large volumes of data. You can send huge objects via HTTP, which are normally supported in a full-fledged server. So this is essentially a complete like full-fledged environment for running your own server, and you don't need to worry about anything about like hosting, whether your server crashes then you have to rerun it or anything of that sort, because this function will run every single time it receives a request. And it doesn't matter if one request made it crash. The second request, if that is fine, working fine with the logic, then that will work as usual. If you have worked with node servers, you will realize you will know that if your node server crashes once, then you have to go and restart it. You have to run the node app.js command once again so that that server is live again. But that doesn't happen over here. And also, you don't need to worry about the terminal that you're using to run your node server. All you need to worry about is just this piece of code that you've written over here. Now, there's another thing, like this is pretty much it. This is a basic like imitation of what you can do with Firebase. You can have data input via your application that we saw in app.js, reading, writing, anything that you want to do with your data, and you can modify them via REST APIs. Then you can change these things. Like what we did was functions.https on request. Now you can even have functions.database.on update or on delete or whatever event you are trying to target. And in that way, whenever you make a change inside of your database or whenever some user makes a change, then this function will get triggered and do the required things, whatever you want it to. So that's like the basics is done over here. Since we are also short on time, instead of going into detail on the image project, what I'll do is I'll show you the sample of it and what it aims to do, and then we can like end. We can have a simple Q&A session for clearing doubts, and we can end the discussion. So just a second. So this is what I was trying to cover today, and this is pretty much self-explanatory. What this does is you can generate thumbnails for each image that are uploaded to your Firebase storage. So let's say you're trying to build a photo gallery app, let's say. So in that case, in that application, you are allowing your users to upload full size, like 4 MB, 5 MB size photos. Now, showing that in a grid view or in a gallery view, as we call it, that can be a little costly because let's say you are showing 9 images at a time on your screen, and each image is 4 to 5 MB in size. So whenever the user opens that gallery view, they will have to give in 35 MBs, 40 MB, 45, whatever is the calculation, that much amount of data via the internet plan. So that can get costly for the user, and that can get a little that can create a bad experience as well, because downloading that big amount in short span of time, that's difficult. Not every connection will support it. So what applications generally prefer to do is, for each image that is uploaded in a photo application, they have a separate instance called thumbnail for it, and that thumbnail is generated from their main image only. So let's say I upload a photo. Let me quickly open the storage interface. So I go to storage and get started. Next. Okay, fine, done. These are the defaults that I'm choosing. So we have a bucket over here. Now we can choose to upload any files inside of this. So if we choose to upload, let's say I have a photo of myself over here. I open this. So it's 187 KB right now. It will simply upload it over here. But what if I need a thumbnail for it generated as well? Now, as an end user, I will not be uploading my photo and a thumbnail of that photo together inside an application. What I will do is I'll just upload this particular photo, and I want that application to be intelligent enough to generate a thumbnail out of it. So this particular project, the generate thumbnails, this deploys a Firebase function that will just watch your cloud storage bucket and then generate a thumbnail for it as soon as an image is uploaded. So it's similar to how we saw our functions directory. You have an index.js file that contains the source code, and inside that they have written the entire code. Like they are using the storage trigger. Like whenever inside functions.storage an object is finalized, let's say uploaded, let's say modified, updated, or anything of that sort, in which there has been some change made on an object. So in that case, this function will be triggered, and this will download the metadata first: name, content type, where is it stored exactly, where can we store it locally for modification, and then it will ignore if it's not an image. If it's not inside the image directory, it will not run, because not everything that you will upload inside your application will be an image, right? So if it already is a thumbnail, it has a thumbnail prefix already, then it will not run again, and it will say it is already a thumbnail. And if everything goes well, then it will download it. Like it will look for the correct bucket and then metadata and all that stuff, create a local file, and then download it from the bucket inside this functions instant. Once downloaded, it will then run the thumbnail creation process. Like it spawns a new thread. If you read about software development in detail later, you'll realize what threads and what spawning means. But essentially, what it means is that it's creating another process inside of which your like this compression part, this generation of thumbnail that will happen, and at the end you upload the thumbnail to the destination what you had chosen earlier. So what we did choose earlier was thumb file path. What it did was it joined the original path with thumb prefix that we choose, and thumb prefix was thumb underscore. So let's say I upload a file named Kumar Harsh, then at the end the thumbnail that will be generated will be thumb underscore then Kumar Harsh. So that's how the naming has been taken care of. And then once upload part is complete, then they're just clearing all the things that they allocated and returning the results when it was read, when it was done, and all those things. And then just returning a log to the user that thumbnail URL saved to database and image has been uploaded and all that stuff. So this is the process that it follows. And to run it in your own system, all you need to do is just Firebase init initially, create a project like this, and copy the code from here. Whatever code is in this project, just paste it over here, add another function. It will create another function over here, like exports dot one more function, and deploy it using Firebase deploy only functions. And once deployed, you can simply upload something to an images folder inside of your Firebase project by a user, or let's say by the interface that I just showed you, like this, choosing upload file, and it will create a thumbnail for you. So I'll actually set that in action while we take in questions, so that at the end we can take a look at how it works. So let me quickly copy the code. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. I see only one message in here which says, please give some hands-on for authentication feature. That seems helpful. It indeed is helpful, but that is a relatively longer process. I'll show you the basics of it, but let me just give me a moment while I configure this one. Till then, if we have any other questions, we can take them up. And just a hint, whatever project you will get by tonight or by tomorrow, hopefully, That will be based on a Firebase Functions project as well as some connection with your local application as well. So make sure that you are pretty clear with whatever I just demonstrated here, the things that I did on the screen. And if you have any doubts about how we can do anything, something like any particular service of Firebase, feel free to ask about it. Because in the next assignment or the questions that you'll get, we will not be there to help you because that's a test essentially. So please make sure that you are well versed with all the concepts that we talked about, the different models, because we also have a set of questions in that quiz as well. So you need to be clear with the concepts, you need to be clear with the practical applications. And if you have anything, any doubt in mind, feel free to raise it up right now. The issue that we are facing right now is that there are multiple dependencies which have not been installed and they have been used directly. So we need to make sure that they are installed as well. These things have to be present internally, I guess. Let's check once again. That works. So in any case, I accept any data from an HTML form and need to write it to a database. Then will I need a function separately for the writing operation, or the code for writing be included directly inside a script tab? You can go with both of the ways, Shivam. And I would suggest that you go with directly including the code to write inside a script tag because that's super simple. And if you want to do any checks, like if you want to make sure that data is correct while uploading, if you want to have a server side validation of the data, then you can go through the like the functions process. All right, it looks like it went successfully this time. And as the changes that we have made, we have just added a new function, generate thumbnail, and it's creating that for us for the first time because we don't have it built already. As you can see, our function has been created successfully. Now we can try out uploading. I'll come back to your question, Shivam, after we have completed this example once. So what you can do is go to the interface once again, and just for this exercise, I've downloaded a bigger image so that we can see the difference between what we uploaded and what thumbnail was made. I'll just delete this for now. And as we have defined in our code that we need to have the image inside our image or images folder, I guess. Let me quickly check. It has to be inside the image folder only. So I'll create a folder called image and go inside of it and then upload the test image that I just downloaded over here. Let's check the size of this once. And that shows 1.72 MB. Open. It's loading. Loading completed. Let's wait for the function to do its magic. Inside the logs, we should have a trigger. Generate thumbnail has been triggered. We can see over here. So it will take some time, and I am okay. So this requires, I guess, some more permissions. Let me check storage once if it has done something. Oh, we already have it. So those are things that you can ignore simply. But as you can see, the compression part has been done. We had an original image of 1.73 MB, and the new image is just 7.77 KB because it's meant to be a thumbnail. So it should be in less than 10 KBs. So all that we did was we did have a lot of hiccups on the way, but what we did was we just created a function using Firebase init, and then added a function resource to it, wrote our code, whatever code we wanted. Now, Firebase functions has a very huge like collection of samples that you can use directly, like whatever things you can think of, making maybe counting how many children are stored inside a node, converting images to a certain let's say extension, or sending messages from GitHub to Slack, making a bot like that, making images sharp, or anything of that sort. Whatever you can see in this list, you have pre-written code for all of it, and there are a lot of people who are working on this. There are a lot of pull requests that are adding more code day by day. So Firebase has this added benefit of having a huge community around it. So it's easy to find people who are working on the same problem as you, and then getting a really good production level code for it. So if you go back to that, it's still loading anyway. It doesn't matter. What really matters is the size difference that we just saw over here. So this is how you can deploy a function and then see it in action. If we add any image anywhere else, it will not work because that's how we have defined it to be. So that's it from my side in this session. I'll take a quick look at the last message that we had. It says if any such operation is done directly from within a script tag, then what's the point in deploying separate functions? So the entire point of deploying separate functions is to have more control over the process. Now I can upload, like you just saw, I can upload images of any quality, any type, any size I want. But I need my platform, my application to be intelligent enough to generate the resources that it requires from my input. Now you would not want the user to upload a thumbnail as well as an actual image. You would want your app to generate the thumbnail directly. Similarly, you will not expect the user to provide the correct data every time. You will not expect that the user will not use any obscene language, that the user will not do anything wrong. There has to be some sort of server side validation. So that thing, the server side part, you can do easily with functions. And there are a lot of other things, like we just saw, having a separate API for entering data. Let's say you have a form in your application, but you also want to be automate the process of entering huge volumes of data. Now if you want to enter 100 records, you cannot do that using that form, and it's not wise to write a code every time you want to enter data. So it will make much more sense if you have an API that writes data to your database, and that form that uses that API only, so that you can enter data through that form, or you can use even Postman to write huge like amounts of data. So always, like whenever you talk about automating things, whenever you want to do things at bulk, APIs are the way to go because they can automate things. They can remove the manual process very easily. And functions is what adds this API gateway in the middle. It removes the, like, you don't have to go and click on upload file every time. Let's say you want to upload 100 files, you can have a function for that which takes in the files via HTTP requests, and you can simply use a Postman or Hopscotch, any kind of API testing platform, API consumption platform to provide that data to your application. So that is where functions excel. And that when you get into real application development, you'll realize that is the bulk of your application process. Like, you do create applications for end users, but there are times when you require that not the end users, but you yourself upload huge amounts of data, let's say as starters or as fillers or anything of that sort. And in that time, you will feel the need for such an interface which can automate things. So that's pretty much it. Apart from that, do we have any other questions? Once again, I hope this is pretty clear to everybody, because we will be providing an assignment based on this. And even though there is a lot of documentation available on the internet, but even I remember that it was difficult for me for the first time. So it's always good if you ask your questions, if you ask your doubts right now, but you can always refer to the internet later if you want to. I guess we'll wait till 8:30 and we'll end the session then. Or if we see no activity even before that, I guess we'll end it before. Can we have a yes or no from everybody who's present in the meeting right now? How did you like the session? Was it clear to you? Was it helpful? Did you like the content? Or did you feel like this was something that you already knew?
The thing is, one session on Firebase isn't enough. It would be nice if you plan further sessions in the future after our test.
For sure, we can do that. But what I'm concerned about right now is the services that I talked about right now. Storage, database, are those things clear? I know authentication is something that you wanted to go into, but we cannot get into that right now. But apart from that, whatever we did today, I'm just asking about that. I'm not saying that you have to learn Firebase in one day. But was there any point in this session where you felt like you were lost? You could not catch up with what was going on?
No, nothing such, but maybe for those who have no knowledge or those who are not familiar with React, they might have thought something.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
So do we have any other feedback from anybody else?
And in case
Yeah.
in case we need to, like you told, that we need to censor the obscene languages, so for that we'll need some kind of machine learning thing, something which detects anomaly in the text which someone has stored and something which has been written into our database. So how will we link that thing with the database? So all those things, they need to be written inside a function, I guess, isn't it?
Actually, you do not need that. It's called text moderation, and it's simply like this. It replaces the words with stars,
Mhm.
and it maintains a list of words that are bad. So it's just as simple as that. Now, I mean, we are not looking for the meaning over here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when you're talking about obscene things, it's not about what they're trying to mean. It's about what words they're using, and those words can be made into a list. So this essentially kind of like it houses a list of things that are bad. It checks for your data to contain anything from that list, and if it is there, then just replace with stars. If you were to go into an ML kind of thing, then you can go into the machine learning thing here. They also have some pretty good samples which you can take a look at. Let me show that as well. So get started. And you can do these things. These are most common what you do with ML: text recognition from images, image labeling, what's inside that image, face detection, and all these things. So you can simply click on get started. They have pre-written code for it even, and you can deploy and get started inside of your applications. If you want to do something custom, then in that case, you will have to go into the custom tab and then upload your custom models over here. Then they become an API and you can access them directly. They even have an entire section on how you can use TensorFlow to build models, and they have like one of the greatest things that I find about Firebase is that they are very well documented. Apart, like different from AWS and GCP, where you have a lot of services and very less documentation, Firebase restricted itself only to a certain set of services, 5 or 6 things in the beginning, and it provided very large sets of examples as well as API documentation so that you can use them to the fullest. So whatever you can see on the screen right now, there's a huge amount of content for it, and you can always get started with it even without anybody else teaching you how to. Because in the beginning, none of us we took classes or anything of this sort. We all began on ourselves, and that was pretty easy. In the beginning, it was tough maybe, but after 3 or 4 test projects, it becomes very easy.
Yeah. Now, suppose I have one more doubt. Actually, if suppose I need to read data in TensorFlow, I need to input a data set, and that data has to be read from my database. Okay, so suppose I'm trying to figure out the pattern of donations in some areas, for a particular area, some pattern of donations, how much people donate, and what's the general occasions where they donate, and all sort of things. So for that, I need to access data from my database and need to filter that and process that data in TensorFlow. So
Yep.
how will that be possible?
You saw how we were able to access our objects inside functions, right?
Yeah.
There was an event, there was a trigger that allowed you functions to access storage. So similarly, TF Lite is something that like it's not the basic TensorFlow that you write in other Python-based machine learning applications. It's a different version that Firebase directly uses, and inside of that you have APIs similar to how you saw functions.storage, with which you can access database storage or whatever you need inside of your TensorFlow code. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So I guess we are on time now. Paritosh, what shall we do ahead? Shall we end the session?
Yes, we should end the session, I think.
Okay, do you have any announcements for them or do you want
Yes, so you will get the details regarding the quiz and the project assignment tomorrow. And so that will, all the details will be provided to you on the Slack channel itself. That's all.
Yes, and Kumar Harsha, was it like what I said you that we need to give test for only one of the streams, either ML or web or cloud, or I can apply for more than one also?
Till now, what we have in mind is you can apply to as many as you want, but in the end, you will be selected for a maximum of 2 or 3 departments only because we also understand one student cannot work in 5 departments at the same time. So we don't want to restrict you from applying to multiple departments, but the best performance in the top 2 departments only, they will be considered and you will be selected there.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay, then thank you everybody for joining and good luck for the test.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir, for taking out time.
All right, no problem. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.